Hey, I'm Olivia, and you're listening to Soarin Around WDW. All right, so we are back this week to talk about Fantasyland. We're kind of making our way clockwise around the park. We started in Adventureland, went to Frontierland. Then last week we visited Liberty Square. So this week we're going to start in Fantasyland, which is a pretty large section of the park. It has a lot of attractions, a lot of restaurants, a lot of character meet and greets. So there's a lot to talk about in this section. And it used to be split into two sections, which we'll kind of talk about between Fantasyland and Toontown, but now they're combined into one larger section. And so there's a lot going on in this area of the park. It has a lot of classic dark rides, but also has a lot of the little kid things than just the other sections of the park do. There's a lot, obviously, for young kids to do in this part of the park. So starting up, if you're coming out of Liberty Square, the first attraction that you come to is Peter Pan's Flight. So this is one that was there not on opening day, but shortly after. It was October 3rd, 1971. And Walt kind of brought his original plans for Disneyland when this was built there to an investor in 1953. And then Peter Pan was featured on the map, the original map for Fantasyland. The film was released in February 1953, which actually seemed later than I thought in my brain. Like, I thought this was a way earlier movie release, but it was a huge hit with audiences all around the world. And Walt knew that he wanted to bring it to the theme park and was starting to make Tinkerbell a big face of the company. She was obviously very involved in his show on TV. And then in November 1954, Walt wrote a letter to his sister, Ruth, about what he had been doing at Disneyland and described Fantasyland to her. And there's this cool quote from him that says, "Here you will find Sleeping Beauty Castle, a number of fantastic rides. Everything here will be based on the idea of fantasy. We'll recreate portions of Snow White, Peter Pan, Alice in Wonderland, which will be known as Walk Through and Fly Through in the case of Peter Pan." So when you went to Disneyland, did you get to ride this there?
Yes, we did. I do remember it quite well. I know my little sister, who was just 3 at the time, Julie, your Aunt Julie, she just loved the ride and loved the whole Peter Pan thing before she even got there. I'm sure she had some books, if I remember right, that she got some of the golden books, the Disney golden books. You know those, I'm sure,
Yeah.
with your kids. Yes, she had some of those, and so that was a big deal going on that ride. I thought it was very well done. And it is, as we know, it's still really popular today. So.
Yeah, very popular to the point where it sometimes has insanely long lines for the kind of attraction that it is. I mean, at Magic Kingdom and Disney World, it often is an hour long wait for that attraction, and it really is truly an hour. I don't remember how long the line was at Disneyland. I believe we also rode this there, but I think it's comparable, like still very long wait there as well. That is definitely one of the most popular, if not the most popular ride in Fantasyland per the wait time. Besides, we'll get into Seven Dwarfs Mine Train in a little bit. That's definitely the top for kids with a height requirement, but this is the most popular ride probably in the entire park that does not have a height requirement, as according to, wait times that you see in the number of people that they get on and off the ride. And then, according to Disney Wiki, there was in talks of the ride vehicle initially at Disneyland to be Peter Pan himself instead of what we know now as the classic sailboat that you sit in for the ride. And the guest would be placed on Peter Pan's back. And in the end, they decided to do the ships or the sailboats, which made the change of perspectives with the later refurbishment that they had at Disneyland easier to understand. And Peter Pan wasn't actually seen in the ride, I guess, initially at Disneyland because you were supposed to be Peter Pan, which is interesting that they changed that around. Even though there was a lot of praise for the attraction, guests were confused why Peter Pan wasn't there. So then when they opened Magic Kingdom's version of the ride, they obviously had Peter Pan front and center in more of that ride. And then Disneyland version was changed in 1983 so that he was there too, which was cool. But there was an Imagineer named Herb Ryman who designed and created the first ever map for Disneyland when Walt was trying to conceptualize it, and then also thought of the actual first version of the Peter Pan ride in 1954. And something that wasn't in the plans, or that was in the plans but was not included later, was a more immersive queue, which is interesting because that would have been really cool. At Disneyland, they had this idea for this queue that featured more London buildings, streets, and would have been better to walk through than just the plain old queue that they first started out with. A few months later, somebody named Marvin Davis continued the work on the plan and added a lot of elements like the Skull Rock, the Hangman's Tree, Crocodile Creek, and the Imagineers began to work on the ride vehicle and testing it. And Ken Anderson began designing the inside of the actual ride. So after the track and the vehicles and the layout had been tested, it was begun to be put together March of 1955. And the technology at the time of using the vehicle system was borrowed from Cleveland Tram Rail Company. And that was a conveyor belt system that they used in factories to transport materials. But the ships rode along the ceiling instead of the floor, like many of the other rides, obviously. And so that was a single track. And to keep the boats kind of in place while riders got on and off the boat, they had to put a keel at the bottom that would go into a slot in the floor. So it was definitely a very complicated for its time track. Do you have anything else to kind of add about that track or the actual like technology of the ride, Dad?
Yeah, I do. I have a real strong background in the conveyor business.
Yes.
Worked in that business for a number of years, almost 20 years. And I remember riding in that as an adult on that ride and seeing the overhead conveyor that supports the boat as you travel through the air. And I thought that was really cool because we sold parts like that to Ford and Chevrolet, Ford and Chrysler back in the day. And I know still use that technology still in assembly lines at car companies. So that was a very standard thing that car companies used. But I thought was always interesting too. I think one reason that's so popular too, I think, is because you are like flying. You have the conveyor system over you, so you don't really see a track below you. It really feels like you're flying. And as a
Yeah.
kid, you're like, wow, I'm flying. You look down and you don't see anything other than the scenes that they put together. Another thing I thought was kind of interesting too, you're only 17 feet above the floor. And it seems like you're a lot higher, but they use forced
Yeah.
perspective on all the little, as you fly out the nursery window there in the beginning, because you're supposed to be like Peter Pan flying out. I just thought that was kind of neat how they use forced perspective. It makes it look like the buildings in London are way down there. They're really not. And as you get higher, the highest point is only 17 feet. So I thought it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, that it does seem a lot higher when you're in the actual ride vehicle. It feels a lot higher. And then at Disney World, Peter Pan's flight opened when Walt Disney World opened in 1971, but just a couple days later. And about 20 years later, the Imagineers from Disneyland, made that ride. So it was about 16 years from when Disneyland opened to when this ride opened. So they wanted to make some more upgrades and make it a little different. So before they did this whole new Fantasyland, Magic Kingdom added new animatronics of Wendy, John, Michael in the nursery scene. They also added the Mermaid's Lagoon and the rainbow onto the Neverland scene, which Disneyland did not have until about 1983, I guess. And then the ride time was actually longer at Disney World than Disneyland because they tried to make it more scenes than the Disneyland version had and put more from the movie into it. So they added the Peter and Hook fight scene, which is one of the coolest scenes. And then Wendy on the plank was a whole separate scene. And then at the end with Hook and the TikTok croc right before you're done on the ride. And the Disney World, they tried to remedy the ride's long waits to some extent when the interactive material and the interior queue was redone. So it did make it much better. I know as someone, we've waited in that long line outside before they made the queue more immersive, and it was so long and nothing to look at, and it was hot because it was all outdoors. It was covered, but still really hot. And then when they redid it in 2014, having that indoor air conditioned area, but also lots to look at. There's some parts where, Tinkerbell's running around the room. There's parts where you move your arms around and different things happen. So the interior queue doesn't actually make it shorter in wait time, but it does make it feel not quite as long, or it gives, the kids something to do, which we're all about cues that are interactive. That definitely helps. On average, the wait time is between 60 and 80 minutes, which we kind of talked about. In 2024, they just recently, this past year, closed for 6 weeks and updated a few things to be a little more politically correct, but the figures in the area where the Native Americans are, they updated to look a little more human. The chief was actually removed, which I thought was interesting. Tiger Lily and her grandmother perform a butterfly dance by the fire, and they're on this spinning turntable. And the other thing that they updated, which I guess I didn't notice, were that the teepees in the loading area were repainted to match those in the actual ride. So I didn't, that's like a very subtle thing. Did not notice that when Regan and I just went on it for our first ride of the challenge in December. But the Peter Pan attraction is also in all of the Disney parks across the world except for Hong Kong. So that shows that Peter Pan is still very popular all around the world. But I do remember riding this a lot as a kid. I know it's one of our mom's favorite movies, if not her favorite, from Disney. So she loved to go on this. I like it. I like a lot of the other dark rides better. I don't fully understand the hype around it, but I know it's Maddie's favorite Disney animated movie besides like Pixar movies. So it's still got a lot of hype for whatever reason. It's a popular one.
Yeah, I always thought it was funny that when we rode it, right at the end, as you're just coming around the corner, getting ready to go back to the exit queue area, you had that big break and it just stops really
Oh yeah.
fast. I always thought
Yeah.
like I thought that's kind of a strange way to, but maybe that's just the old conveyor system, the overhead, the way they stopped them. It's not really designed for people to be riding on it. And I always thought that was like, almost a backbreaker when they hit the brake there at the end.
Yeah,
I don't know
very
why I remember
jerky.
that, but yeah, it was very jerky at the end. I'm like, okay, we're done.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then going across the street from Peter Pan is It's a Small World, which is obviously a classic, huge deal at Disneyland. It's still a big deal at Disney World, but it was an opening day ride. It's known as the happiest cruise that ever sailed. And when Walt Disney was first coming up with this ride, it was actually going to be called Children of the World. And the attraction was created in support of the United Nations Fund, the United Nations Children's Fund, or UNICEF, and its message was supposed to be peace and unity that has really, stuck around for over 60 years. The themed World Cooperation Togetherness was supposed to be premiere or did premiere at the New York World's Fair in 1964. And the It's a Small World ride was extremely popular there. So they brought it to Disneyland, then brought it obviously afterwards to Disney World. For those of you who are not familiar, it's a water-based boat ride that is in the Fantasyland area and at a bunch of the theme parks worldwide. It's in obviously Disneyland Park in California, Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World, Tokyo Disneyland, Disneyland Paris, and it's the largest indoor attraction at Hong Kong Disneyland. So the only property that does not have it is Shanghai, which is interesting. But it is, yeah, extremely popular still to this day. It is one that doesn't have quite as long of a wait time as Peter Pan, I think because the song can drive people a little nutty, but it does still have a wait. When we were there in December, it still had a good wait in both the Fast Pass line and the regular line, which surprised me. But Rolly Crump was another of, we talked about him with the Haunted Mansion, but he was an Imagineer very much involved in this It's a Small World ride. And Walt Disney, I guess, pulled all of the show designers into a room and said, there's one more piece of real estate that they've offered to us, and I've got this idea for a little boat ride that we can do. And Rolly Crump said, we all thought a little boat ride. I mean, God, we are working on Lincoln, the Carousel of Progress, and using the highest technology and animatronic figures. And we are working on Ford too. And Walt Disney wanted them to do a little boat ride. So I think a lot of the Imagineers were like, what is this hokey ride that he has come up with in his head? But I guess originally It's a Small World was imagined by WED Enterprises, and that stood for Walter Elias Disney Enterprises. It took 11 months for the project to complete. And once the New York World's Fair closed, they dismantled it, which is crazy, piece by piece, and then relocated the whole thing to Disneyland Resort. So the Magic Kingdom version took about 18 months to build. And when the ride first opened in Disneyland, it was on May 28th, 1966. And Walt Disney invited children from all around the world to dedicate the new attraction, which these are things that Regan and I really love when they do stuff like this. But they each brought a container of water from rivers and seas from their homelands and added it into the ride in Anaheim, which is just kind of cool. The theme song for It's a Small World is the second draft that they had ended up selecting for the ride. The first was all these different melodies of the world's national anthems together, and people thought it was way too much. and Walt Disney did not like it. So then he asked the Sherman Brothers, which should ring a bell to everybody, to create a song that felt like uniting the children of the world through this boat ride. And they came up with the memorable music that gets stuck in everybody's head today. So, former Disney CEO Michael Eisner made the claim back in 1985 that the It's a Small World theme song of the same name was the most played song of all time. And when people asked him, why do you say that? He said, well, it plays for 16 hours a day on a continuous loop in 5 different theme parks across the globe. And I guess Robert Sherman Jr. added, since 1983, there's not been a moment when It's a Small World wasn't playing in at least 2 locations on the globe. Who else can claim that? Which is true. So they call it the most played song in the world. And Magic Kingdom's version of the ride has over 600 figures with costumes, which is impressive. The attraction definitely at Disney World, if you've been to Disneyland's version, it's not quite as elaborate. It definitely isn't the outdoor exterior portion of the Disneyland ride, especially at Christmas time, is amazing if you've never seen it. So the interior of Disney World is still pretty cool, but it's a much smaller scale compared to Disneyland. And for over 30 years, the Magic Kingdom version of the attraction didn't really have much change. But then in 1990, they, I guess, added Chinese dolls into one of the scenes. They then added African children with hyenas, or those were removed in the 1970s, which I thought I remembered those still. But I guess when I was doing research, it said that that was removed. Maybe I just remember pictures. Maybe it's just the hyenas now.
I think
I
it's just
see.
the hyenas now. Yeah, because the hyenas I think are still there.
Okay, that's what I thought. And then the original sponsor of the attraction was Kodak, and then Mattel sponsored after that. The ride closed in May 2004 for a big refurbishment, which included new entrance, exterior, new sound system. And then after that renovation was complete, it opened in 2005. But then again in 2021 for the 50th anniversary, it was all repainted with bright colors, and then a doll in a wheelchair was added in 2023, which I actually don't remember seeing. I've ridden it twice since then, but I do not remember picking that out. So I'll have to look for that next time in the 600 dolls that are in there and see if I can find it without any spoilers. But yeah, so that was Small World. We did go on this. It's my grandma Sandy, my mom's favorite ride. So whenever she was with us, we always had to go on It's a Small World. Otherwise, it's definitely not an attraction that I often choose to go on. It's another one that gets very backed up. You can sit in that last scene, which is probably one of the best scenes with all the dolls in the Ferris wheel for a long time because all the boats are kind of stuck trying to get out. But is there anything else that you remember, like in particular, about this ride, Dad?
Yeah, I think most people either just love it or they just hate it.
Yeah.
Can we skip Small World? But they have maybe small kids, and of course, some people like your grandma Sandy. She did love it. I think your mom loves it a lot too. One thing I thought was kind of neat, my wife Doreen, when she was 4 years old, went to the New York World's Fair because she lived in New York City. She was born and raised in New York City.
Yeah.
She actually went on that ride at 4 years old.
Oh,
And
wow.
her mother, Gloria, told me some time back that she went on it and she cried through the whole thing because she was scared of the dolls.
Oh, really? Oh, that's
But
funny.
she was on it when it was before we actually got to a Disney park. She actually went on it
Wow.
with her mom, and her mother, Grandma Gloria, just loved it. Said it was a wonderful ride. Of course, a lot of the Disney rides were kind of the hit of that World's Fair, and that could be a whole nother thing you
Episode.
could talk
Yeah, we'll
about
have to
down the
do
road
that.
because there's so much there. Another thing that I thought was kind of cool is the ride system that they developed for It's a Small World. They turned around and used that in Pirates of the Caribbean, so that helped to develop that ride,
Okay.
that flume technology where they have jets, propelling you and it's real quiet. That's how they came up with that ride technology for the pirates also. And one last thing, Mary Blair. Have you heard of Mary Blair before? She was not really an Imagineer. I believe she was a designer,
Designer. Okay.
and she designed all the colors and the look of the dolls and everything. I know Mark Davis too, of another animator that we talked about before, did a lot with the Haunted Mansion and Jungle Cruise. He was involved in doing a lot of the things also with It's a Small World. This is all when all the Imagineers got together during the New York World's Fair, and they knocked out a bunch of different rides that are still very popular and going today, which is pretty cool in its own resort. So that's my thoughts there.
Very cool. It was a very cool ride. All the, like we talked about before, it's a whole episode we could do about the World's Fair, but there's a lot of really cool attractions that came out of that, and it's neat to see how they, dismantled them and brought them to Disneyland or Disney World and kind of where they went after the World's Fair. But that's really neat. And then the carousel, which has been renamed, now it is called the Prince Charming Regal Carousel. This was an opening day attraction also, October 1st, 1971. And on June 1st, 2010, the name was changed from the original name. So the original name was Cinderella's Golden Carousel, and they changed it to Prince Charming Regal Carousel, which is weird. I was reading about that, which we'll talk about in a little bit as to why they thought this name change was good. But in my opinion, I always think of it as Cinderella's Carousel, not Prince Charming's Carousel. But there are 90 horses and 18 rows with 5 horses in each row. And the Prince Charming Regal Carousel was actually built, I thought this was really cool, in 1917 by the Philadelphia Toboggan Company, so over 100 years ago. It started out as the Liberty Carousel at Belle Isle Park in Detroit, Michigan, and was 60 feet in diameter and was the largest carousel at that time. There were 72 horses then, and each were hand carved out of maple wood by German and Italian craftsmen. There were also 4 chariots for riders who preferred to not do the up and down, motion, obviously, and people who needed to kind of sit instead of climb on a horse. But then the theme at the time for that carousel was Liberty. So the horses were painted red, white, and blue. And there apparently was an image of Lady Liberty in one of the decorative carvings, and you can still see that on one of the horses today, supposedly. But the 72 horses that were there ended up, obviously, they added to it, but Disney bought the carousel and they did this massive refurbishment on it. They stripped them down to the original wood and then painted them white in different colors. Obviously, it's a very colorful ride to highlight each one's unique carvings. And then they added 23 karat gold as well as silver and bronze to each of the horses, and then added scenes from Cinderella's story to the carousel as well. Another thing that I thought was interesting was in the US, we usually spell carousel with one R, but in France, they spell it with 2 R's. And since Cinderella is a French fairy tale, which I don't think I realized, Disney went with the double R. So there are 2 R's in the name of the carousel, which I think I spelled wrong in most of this document that I made for this. But yeah, it's spelled with the 2 R's because it's a French fairy tale, which I learned doing this. There are 2,300 popcorn lights on the carousel, plus or minus, which is crazy. It's definitely a sight to see at night. If you've never seen the carousel or ridden it at night, it's really beautiful to look at, post fireworks if you go back over to Fantasyland. And people say that there's a specific horse on the carousel that is called Cinderella's horse or Cindy, and it has a gold ribbon tied around its tail, but Disney has never officially said that this is Cinderella's horse. Actually, one of the Imagineers that helped with maintaining the ride, her name was Isle Vaught or Isla Vaught, I don't know how she says her name, believes that Cinderella's horse would not be on the inside row. It would be far more elaborate if that were truly the case. And Cinderella never rode a horse in her actual movie, so the Disney Imagineers did not ever confirm that Cinderella's horse was there. And when they rewrote the carousel backstory, they did not include that. So a lot of other attractions or parks at other attractions at other parks have a similar name, like Cinderella's Carousel, Prince Regal Carousel, but the one at Disneyland is actually like Sword in the Stone, I believe I read, which was interesting because at Magic Kingdom and obviously in Walt Disney World, they have the Sword in the Stone in front of the carousel, but it's not at all related to the carousel theme. The only thing that I could really find about this new backstory was that they changed the name because they wanted it to be that Prince Charming gave Cinderella this carousel as a gift. And I thought that was a super lame explanation for why they changed the name. They should have just left it as is. It had already been that way for 40 years. So I did not really understand. So if anyone else has information about that, let us know. But I thought that was weird. But we've ridden this many times. We've ridden the horse, we've ridden the bench, a lot of different opportunities to ride, especially now with little ones. They love the carousel. So it's always one they want to go on. But what else do you have to add about the carousel, Dad?
I like the carousel, and even as an adult, when occasionally when Doreen and I would go, we would go on the carousel. It's just something. It's a very old school, old-fashioned attraction that's been around for what, 100, 120 years, probably, maybe longer. And I think it's just, and the backstory of the carousel being one of the largest ones back in the day, and the elaborate carving of the horses. If you really look at it, not just go on another, Disney ride and go ride around a few times and get off. If you really look at the horses and all the details of the animals on there, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So I think that's next time people do it, if they have some extra time, to hop on and take a look, or even just go there and watch it. Just look for all the different animals that are carved on it, and the colors and everything. So yeah, I still really like it. It's just an old school amusement park attraction, but it's probably one of the coolest ones in the country. So.
Yeah, it is cool that it's been around for over 100 years and what they did to change it, but they've kept it very similar. They haven't made a lot of changes to the actual ride since it was brought to Disney World, which is really neat. And then moving to Mickey's PhilharMagic. So this opened in October 8th, 2003. This took the place of Mickey Mouse Revue and then the Lion King show that was there, Legend of the Lion King, for a long time. And this was directed, the actual film, so it's a 3D move for, well, they call it 4D, I think, movie. But the film was directed by George Scribner, who also directed Oliver and Company, which was a film, if you've never seen it, it's a great film, 1988 movie with a cat and dog, and the cat's name is Oliver. And Mickey's PhilharMagic is about 12 minutes long. It has 3D effects, but also scents and water. It has a bunch of different characters from Disney movies, and it at the time it was made was, or I think still today, actually, possibly, I'll have to confirm that, but it is shown on the largest purpose-built 3D screen ever at 150 feet wide, which is really impressive. The versions of the film at California Adventure and Disneyland Paris were both updated in 2021 with a scene based on the Pixar movie Coco. And then Magic Kingdom also received the same update in the fall of 2021 as part of the world's most magical celebration. And then Tokyo Disneyland also received that update as well. So all of them now include this Coco scene, which I did not know. I have not been on this since it was updated, but I think Eiley would really like it. It's just one thing that we don't often stop to do. But I remember when they brought this in, and this is another one that we really loved. We went through it a lot. I think it was really cool how they used the technology with the scents. I remember that was really neat. And, obviously the spraying of the water was already included in a few more 3D attractions, like It's Tough to Be a Bug had that, Muppets Vision 3D had that, but it is a really neat attraction if you've never taken the time to do it. It often doesn't have a long line besides having to wait for the next show to empty out, but it is air conditioned, so it's a nice little break from the heat, and little kids usually like it. But what do you remember about this, Dad, and when we used to go to this show?
We went quite a bit when both you and Regan were young. We've taken our other granddaughter, Mikayla, a variety of times. She always loved it. I don't know. I just think it's a great, like you said, it's more of a 4D type movie. The screen is huge and got a lot of the Disney characters in it. I just think it's really well done. I still miss I think it's Legend of the Lion King. I guess I
Mm-hmm.
really missed that because we watched all that again when you kids were very little, and we all love that kind of puppet show that they had.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I really think I think it's great. I wonder what they're going to do next because it's been around for quite a while. Is that going to stay? What's over 22, 23 years, 22 years? It's a long time for an attraction like that. Are they going to do something down the road? I haven't heard any rumors or anything, but I wouldn't be surprised if the next 4, 5, 6 years, maybe by 2030, they'll come up with something different for that area. I would think because that's a long time for a show like that. But that's just my personal thought.
Yeah, and it's pretty prime real estate in Fantasyland,
Yeah,
obviously. So
yes, it is.
I'm surprised that they haven't totally redone the movie, that they just added that scene, but they didn't like totally redo the actual film. That surprised me because there have been so many movies that have come out since then.
Oh,
But if you
sure.
haven't seen it, it's definitely age appropriate for everyone. There's no really scary parts. It can get a little bit loud, but Donald Duck is the star of the show and he's kind of conducting this orchestra and they go through songs of all these different movies to try to retrieve thing he directs with. Is that what they're trying to get? Or
Yes,
is,
yes. I forget. I don't know if that's called
like
a
a
baton,
yeah, or like a
conductor's
conductor's
baton, or
walk.
something like that.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm
We're
not
not
up to
musical.
speed on that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. So that's kind of the premise of the show, but it's cute. So I'm hoping to take Eiley on that one when we go in March. And then the Mad Tea Party, it's kind of skipping around a little bit here, but the Mad Tea Party, this was another opening day attraction. This was October 1st, 1971 as well. And this first made its appearance at Disneyland in 1955. Some of the early Imagineer ideas for this ride had guests going through an actual tea party, which was hosted by the Mad Hatter and the March Hare. But it showed teacups kind of racing around a racetrack. But by the time the actual attraction opened at Disneyland, the ideas were scrapped for a typical kind of teacup ride. And this was not unique to Disney World or Disneyland at the time. They did have teacup attractions or spinning cup attractions at other kind of fairs or parks, but they made it obviously themed to Alice in Wonderland. And then when Disney World opened in October 1971, the Mad Tea Party became an attraction there as well. And it was very similar to the Disneyland version. There was no roof at the time, which is crazy to think about. But quickly they realized that this was not going to work in Florida because it rains almost every day, in the afternoon especially. And so they added a roof in 1974, as well as the big central teapot, which the dormouse comes in and out of. So if you've never noticed on this ride, there is a mouse that kind of pops in and out of the middle of the teapot, which is really cute. And the ride was updated in 1992 with a new color scheme, music, and lanterns that are all kind of hang from the roof, which makes it really neat again at night. Another really cool nighttime Fantasyland attraction. And then in 2010, the canopy was repainted. But other than that, it's had very minimal change since it first opened. And it is a spinner ride. So, like I talked about, was present at other carnivals and things like that. They do have it matched to what's called the Very Merry Birthday Party sequence from Alice in Wonderland. And that movie came out in 1951. So it had been out a while, even before Disneyland opened, to give them some idea of how to theme it. But the actual platform of the ride is a giant turntable that spins counterclockwise around the teapot in the center. And then there under that, there are three smaller turntables, each of which holds six teacups, and then they rotate clockwise as you ride. So you kind of get this opposite effect, which makes the spinning and nausea a little more intense. As the rider in the cup, you control the speed, so you can spin. You'll spin one way, but you don't have to spin both ways if you don't want to. If you don't spin the actual wheel in the middle, you don't spin double, which makes it a little more enjoyable for some people who get motion sick. But then there are a total of 18 teacups, which can usually sit about three people. Sometimes, if you have little kids, you can fit four or more. And then the dormouse kind of pops up and down and goes back inside. But the Disneyland Paris, and Hong Kong versions do not have that big teapot with the dormouse. So that only happens at Disney World and Tokyo Disney. They do have this pretty much everywhere except for Shanghai Disneyland. All the other Disney sites around the world do have this ride. But we did do this. This was another frequent one. It rarely has a super long wait. Nowadays, I see it getting up to like 20 minutes or so, but oftentimes they hike up what the actual time says. It's not always as long as what the time says, but it is generally a not terrible wait. It's covered, but it's a cute, quick ride that a lot of people like as long as you don't have motion sickness. But we used to go on this quite a lot, Dad, didn't we?
yeah, we did. And I always thought it was fun to really get the teacup really spinning
Oh,
fast. I
yeah.
was that guy. I know sometimes people in your little teacup, they don't want to do that. But I found if you start feeling a little motion sickness or something, you can close your eyes. That seems to help a little bit. Or you can just stare at the center of the little wheel in the center and just keep focused right on that instead of looking around. Start looking around, things can get go south pretty fast. But I love the ride. I love the attraction. I thought what they did with it, like you said, it's a standard amusement park type ride, but I like the location of it, the landscaping around it, all those things that just kind of make it special. Even at Halloween, when we've gone a few times too, we would always catch that and they'd play different types of music that was more like into haunted type music and things for Halloween, which I thought was cool. A little different light show inside, but yeah, I think it's a great ride, and I'd be surprised they ever close that attraction.
Yeah, and that is one of the few rides at Disney World that gets that holiday overlay for Halloween and Christmas. So they kind of change up the lights that are inside, change up the music a little bit, and make it a little more holiday friendly, which is fun. Definitely a fun one to go on, easy one to go on, no height requirement for kids. So that's as long as, like I said, as long as you don't have motion sickness, you'll be good to go on that ride for sure. So moving on to the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, this attraction came a little later because initially it was there as Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, which we've talked about is one of our favorites that still lives on at Disneyland. But they replaced this June 5th, 1999 with the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, which is another dark ride based on the Winnie the Pooh movies and books. The book by A.A. Milne and the movie came out in 1977. So Winnie the Pooh was an attraction that had been in the ideas of the Imagineers at Disneyland for a long time since the movie came out, but it didn't actually get to Disneyland for a lot later. And the Disneyland park was renovating Fantasyland. They decided to add the Pooh Bear ride, but that area reopened in 1983 and the Pooh Bear ride was still not there. So Magic Kingdom's Fantasyland had enough space to make way for the ride, which not really because they replaced another really great ride with this one. But Winnie the Pooh was becoming really popular again because they had a new TV series, The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh show. And this was super popular with kids. And so they decided to bring it over to Disney World. So in 1997, Disney announced the closure of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. And then the result of this announcement actually caused protests from fans. So people loved Mr. Toad so much that, according to The Complete Walt Disney World by Julie and Mike Neal, many fans picketed inside of the park. And the Orlando Sentinel interviewed guests on the ride's last day of operation because people were so upset about this, which we were included. We were not there picketing, but we loved Mr. Toad. So we love Pooh Bear as well. And this is a really neat ride, but I feel like they could have found another place to put it rather than replacing Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. So this opened June 5th, 1999, and it was an instant hit, especially with little kids. The next Pooh Bear ride came over to Tokyo Disneyland and debuted as Pooh's Honey Hut. And this version of the attraction is a little bit different because it has a trackless ride system. They actually sit in their own pot of honey at that ride and it dances using trackless technology. So more like Ratatouille, like Remy's Ratatouille Adventure, or the Rise of the Resistance ride. Those are both trackless rides, Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. But Pooh's Next Adventure then went to Disneyland, and there wasn't very much space to build a new attraction. So they took the Country Bear Jamboree show at Disneyland, which was inside Critter Country, due to its lack of popularity there, and then put in the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh at Disneyland in 2003. So it came much later at Disneyland Park and is still there today. But yes, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride is still at Disneyland, so that's a great place to go. And I guess there is a little nod to it in the Winnie the Pooh ride, which I've never seen. Have you seen this, Dad? That according to this book called The Hidden Magic of Walt Disney World by Susan Vaness, there's a picture on the wall inside of Owl's house in the ride, and you'll see Mr. Toad handing over the deed to his house to Owl. So there's like a picture of Toad. I've never noticed this.
I don't think I've ever seen that too. I've heard that before and I saw the picture online, but I just never looked. I guess I never looked for it, but I don't remember seeing it. No, it must be
Yeah,
there somewhere. Yeah.
I definitely want to find that next time I'm on it. It's a very busy ride. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to look at. You're kind of moving fast and weaving in and out, and different animatronics are moving. So it's easy to not see everything, obviously. So that is something that we'll have to look for next time. But the Magic Kingdom's version is based more on the 1968 featurette, which was called Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day. And then there was something that we've talked about in the past called Pepper's Ghost, which was we talked about in the Haunted Mansion episode in the Liberty Square episode last week. And that same effect is used in the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, which is when Pooh floats away during the dream sequence. So when Pooh is kind of floating into the air, that's when they use that Pepper's Ghost illusion. The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh inside of Magic Kingdom did a big refurbishment, really just for the queue. And it is a very interactive queue. There's little bumblebees to kind of play with for the kids. There's different popping balls that they turn the wheel and the balls pop, and all these different things as you go through the queue. There's screens where you kind of press up against the screen and it, makes that image there and you have to find these hidden items. So that definitely made the queue more tolerable. It still can have a pretty long wait, but not as long as Peter Pan's flight. Usually it sits about 40 minutes on average a day. It's a good one to fast pass if you can. But this is also now at Hong Kong and Shanghai. And at Hong Kong, this is crazy to me. It remains one of the most visited attractions in Fantasyland, frequently running out of fast passes and having wait times over 120 minutes on peak days, which is crazy to me for Winnie the Pooh. But I guess they're Winnie the Pooh crazy over in China. And this is just a really popular ride. So I cannot imagine waiting 120 minutes for this. It is a very cute ride. It's really well done, especially for the 90s technology. They did a really good job making it feel very immersive, and it has kind of all the key points that the classic movie touches on. But what do you remember about this ride coming and Mr. Toad going and all the drama that kind of happened with that?
I remember real well. I remember the protests and everything, and seeing people protest. Not that it was some big, but they had shirts made up and bring back Mr. Toad and all that going on. Of course, that was one of my favorite rides as a kid was Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, which I explained before. But um, I think the Winnie the Pooh ride is really well done. Like you said, the technology for its time is great. I'm glad to see these interactive cues in Peter Pan's flight and Winnie the Pooh because, as you know, having small kids, that can be a long wait. And
Yeah.
they listened to people that were complaining, like, can you make the cues have something going on in the cues because these cues go on forever. So yeah, I think having the interactive queue, I think the ride is great, and I can see why it's so popular because Winnie the Pooh, that's been around for many, many years and it has always been very popular.
Yeah, we're definitely big Winnie the Pooh fans. Eileen's nursery was Winnie the Pooh when she was younger, and it still has some Winnie the Pooh theme in her room today. So we do love Winnie the Pooh over here for sure. And then another one that is newer that used to be called something different that we will talk about too, but it is Enchanted Tales with Belle. And this opened December 6th, 2012. When they opened up the new Fantasyland, it actually has its own house and section now. I have not done this since they made it into this from what it was before. Previously, it had been called, I have it in here somewhere, The Enchanted Tales with Belle in the Fairy Tale Gardens. It was story time with Belle. And we went to that a number of times. It was neat because you got to experience it and be part of the story with Belle and the Beast or Gaston or whoever was there that day. And it was really neat because it wasn't just a character meet and greet where you went up, took your picture, and you were done. You got to actually be part of the little story, which is still similar to what it is today. I've had a few friends that have done this with their kids, and they say it's really neat. But there is this outdoor portion of the queue that begins, and it feels like you're right in Beauty and the Beast. You go through this outdoor garden and get into Maurice's cottage. When you get inside, you can see the Beast Castle kind of looming overhead. And then when you're in the queue, there's a bunch of different things to pick out. I guess the Imagineers did a lot of work bringing the setting from the movie to life in this queue. There's different projects and inventions kind of lying around, mementos from when Belle was young, different surprises that you can look out for. There's some hidden Mickeys in there. There's books like that they show, her love for books, obviously, through different things in French. So one of the titles, I guess, is La Belle au Bois Dormant, which translates to Sleeping Beauty. And then there's different things like where Maurice was marking her height. There is a sketch for Music Box that Maurice completed and gave to, I guess, Belle and the Prince Adam or the Beast as a wedding present. So there's a lot of interesting information about this, and touringplans.com had a lot on this that I had to read about since I hadn't done this myself. But there were a bunch of different hidden Mickeys kind of put throughout this queue as well. And then when you get into a certain area of the cottage, there is a room that gets dark, and then a cast member kind of leads you in there, does this little chant, and causes a magic mirror to transform into this doorway that leads you right into the Beast's castle, which when I was a kid, this is my favorite Disney movie. I love this movie. This would have made me lose my mind, I think. Like the Beauty and the Beast show at Hollywood Studios is still one of my favorite shows. So anything Beauty and the Beast, especially something like that where you get to like walk through her house, walk into the castle is so cool. And people say that it's one of the most magical things in Magic Kingdom that people skip. So it's just something that you don't have time for. People don't really know what it is. And so they don't do it. But once you go in, it's kind of this little show where, similar to the old one, kids can partake and participate. And I guess the wardrobe from the movie kind of tells you how you'll be reenacting the story of Beauty and the Beast. Belle is there. And this isn't so, just as a forewarning, you'll be able to interact with Belle during this, but there's not like a stand there and take your picture with her. So that's one thing that I've heard from friends who have done it, is they were a little disappointed that at the end Belle didn't do a individual picture with each family or each kid. It's just kind of like you do this with her, you can take pictures during it, and then you're done. I do, yeah, again, I do remember going to this a lot. It was announced at D23 in 2009 that this would be coming to the new Fantasyland when they made the Be Our Guest restaurant and made the whole entire Beauty and the Beast kind of section of the park. They, yeah, haven't really made any changes to it since it first opened, except for during COVID when they had to kind of adjust people being involved in some of the interactive stuff. But otherwise, now it seems to be back to how it was originally. And it took Imagineers, I guess, about 5 years to come up with this entire queue and attraction. Is this something you did with Makayla at all when she was younger, Dad?
We did. I think we
Okay.
did it once. And I remember somewhere inside where she became, or she was picked to be the teapot, and it hung this little teapot thing around her, kind of
Okay,
around her
yeah.
neck, and it kind of hung in front of her. And then one older guy was picked to be the beast, had to put this beast stuff on.
Okay,
It was
yeah.
it was kind of cheesy, but the kids got a kick out of it. And I thought the thing I remember the most is when the mirror changes into a doorway.
Yeah.
It's really the technology is pretty cool. Now, this is cool. And then we walked through, and then I guess we were in the Beast Castle. But this sounds like what they've done now is way beyond what it was. I mean, they really
Yeah.
plussed it by what they've done now. I have not been there since because, my granddaughter has just got her driver's license. So that, those
Yeah.
days of going to this probably aren't going to happen anymore until we all go with your kids. So
Yeah, that's what I feel like now. It's funny, they with Anna and Elsa, they're like huge newer princess fans, and Bella's still my favorite, but they aren't as into Beauty and the Beast as I was as a kid because I didn't have all these other options. I mean, there were other princesses, but Belle was it for me. So I don't know if she would love it as much as I did, but it just sounds really, really neat. And the whole Beauty and the Beast area is really cool back there. So that's a really, really nice area. And then moving to Under the Sea, The Journey of the Little Mermaid. This ride opened December 6, 2012. So again, in New Fantasyland. And the movie came out in 1989 and was a big revival of Walt Disney's animated features. It was a big deal. The music in it was huge. So Howard Ashman and Alan Menken came up with the huge, music sequences that has a very popular soundtrack. And the Imagineers wanted to create an attraction based on this, but it kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed. And then 23 years later is when this opened. And so it took a long time to get the attraction, the movie, the, attention that it deserved. It did have the show in Hollywood studios as well, but took a long time to get this attraction over to Magic Kingdom from the original plans. And I guess in the early to mid 90s, Walt Disney Imagineering attempted to develop a dark ride for Disneyland Paris. And then early plans for Tokyo Disney Sea and Hong Kong Disneyland also included the ride, but none of them were built until they did the Magic Kingdom version. Or actually, so I guess California Adventure opened first because they were June 3rd, 2011 in Paradise Pier. And then shortly after that, the Magic Kingdom version opened. But there is an interactive queue. There's things to look at. Scuttle is kind of talking to you throughout the queue. It's not as interactive as some of the other queues in Fantasyland, but there are some little things to do throughout the ride. In the attraction, there are over 183 total animatronics, which is very impressive. And the most impressive is probably Ursula, who is 7.5 feet tall and 12 feet wide. She is a crazy big animatronic. And this was one of the latest dark rides that they did because they just weren't as popular. They were doing so many different, coasters, trackless things. Soarin came out with the flight technology kind of stuff, but this went back to the dark ride days that they created with Winnie the Pooh and different rides like Peter Pan. So they used the queue, or in the queue, they built a castle and caverns. They went and positioned special rock work so that you could see only on Mickey's birthday, which is November 18th at noon Eastern Standard Time, the sun aligns in the rocks to project a silhouette of Mickey's head and ears into the queue. But if it's cloudy, you have to wait a whole another year to try it again. So that's something that is crazy specific that they made. I don't know how they thought of that, but that it's something unique. And the ride is really cute. Definitely, if your kids are an Ariel fan, it's a great one to go on. My daughter was obsessed and dressed as Ariel for one of the Halloween parties a couple years ago, and she was so excited to go on that ride and then meet Ariel afterwards. So it's a very cute ride. No height requirement, similar to the Haunted Mansion doom buggies with the way that you get into the shell and kind of ride throughout the ride. It's actually the same shells that they use at the Living with the Seas or, Finding Nemo ride in Epcot, but it's a cute one. What do you remember about this ride, Dad, when it first opened?
I liked the movie. I always loved the movie. I thought the ride for me, though, it just fell a little short. And I don't know why. Ursula is impressive. I thought the queue was super cool. It seems like Disney is really plus their queues in the last 20 years. They've just done so
Yeah.
many. It's like the queue kind of rivals the attraction sometimes, which I think is great because you do spend a lot of time in the queue, right? You're waiting a long
Yeah.
time and there's some things to do, or just the way it's designed. The Imagineers did some, I thought, did a great job with the Little Mermaid queue. But the ride, I don't know, they when they first came out, it was really bright in there. It's like you didn't feel like you're in the ocean, even though all the stuff was going on. They're playing the song, the main theme song and everything. But then they darkened it down a little bit to make it feel like you're more underwater. That helped. But for
Yeah.
me, even though I've had, Mikayla when she was little, my granddaughter, other granddaughter there, and she liked it, but I just, for some reason, it's something's lacking. And I don't know, I can't put a finger on it, but I don't feel like you're, under the sea. I don't know how you do that short of being in water or something, but,
Yeah. Yeah.
that wouldn't make sense either. So I don't know, but yeah, I think it's well done. The cue's great. Music's great. Movie's great. But that's one we don't always, take time to go on when we go there that much. Maybe once in a while, but it's not like the Haunted Mansion or Pirates or something like
Yeah.
that for us.
Not a
I don't.
must do.
Yeah, it's not a must do.
Yeah, we actually prefer Winnie the Pooh to this ride. I think
Yeah,
we usually,
I
if we're
agree.
gonna pick between the two, we go to Pooh Bear first before we go to this. And I think because that one has like the bouncing element. There is this one, the ride through, you're right, for it being like a ride through ride, it doesn't have anything really extra in the ride. So it makes it not as exciting, that's for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then Dumbo the Flying Elephant, this opened opening day, and but it has changed quite a bit since opening day. So the original design at Disneyland did not include Dumbo. It actually were supposed to be the trippy pink elephants that you see in the movie, which is interesting. But then it was being said that this was encouraging kids to drink alcohol. So Walt Disney said, "All right, never mind. We're not going to do the trippy pink elephants. We're going to go with the actual elephants." And so at Disneyland, there were a lot of flawed prototypes that delayed the ride actually opening. And then it did unveil about a month after. Well, this says a month after the park opened its gates. So maybe it wasn't an open. Oh yeah, at Disneyland. Duh. At Disneyland, it came a month after opening. And each Dumbo at Disneyland had hinged ears that were supposed to flap, but then they weren't working, so then they were removed. So there were a lot of issues with this ride initially. And in the mid 60s, they got new Dumbo vehicle rides, and changes were also made, I guess, to the eyeballs of the elephants. So then at Magic Kingdom, it was an opening day attraction, but was designed a little bit differently than Disneyland. So there at Disneyland, there's no mouse. he didn't come until 1972, but initially there was not one. And then the elephants had no hats at Disneyland, but at Disney World they did. And for most of the ride's presence, the Magic Kingdom, Dumbo the Flying Elephant was positioned more toward the center of Fantasyland. So before they did this big, you know, redo of the park, it kind of was where, if I'm remembering right, where like the Little Mermaid and the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train was, like kind of in the middle there. Is that where it was?
I think it was just very close to the carousel.
Okay,
It
so the
was, it
carousel.
was, yeah,
Okay.
it was north of that, not far from the place where we used to get pizza all the time,
Oh,
Pinocchio's Village
Pinocchio.
House, like right
Okay.
there.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
because I remember
yes.
standing in line. There was no shade, and it was a long wait. And
Yeah.
Florida, it's hot. It used to be a brutal line to wait in, and thank God
Yeah.
they've changed all that now.
Yes, yeah. So it's a lot different now. The ride at the time also didn't have the water feature that Disneyland had. And I guess that's because where it was located originally, the utilidors underneath Magic Kingdom didn't allow for water pipes. So they decided not to do
Yeah,
that. But then in 1993, they updated it with new ride vehicles, but still no water, still in the same spot. But then when New Fantasyland was constructed at Magic Kingdom, Dumbo was moved to the new Storybook Circus area of Fantasyland, and that opened in 2012. But this was totally changed. They added the water features, fountain lights that change color at night. So this is a really cool one to go on at night. Great if you can time it where it's during the fireworks, which can be hard to do. And they also opened a second set of elephants next to the first, which helped with the huge wait times because it was another one that had a really long line, like Dad was saying. And then Timothy Q. Mouse was appeared above the sign, but is no longer at the center of the carousels because there's two. But they also, speaking of amazing interactive cues, opened this new indoor play area that was used for when the ride length was super long, for the queue was super long. So you were given a pager, almost like at a restaurant, and you can use that throughout your wait, and your kids could basically go play on this big air-conditioned playground. And so, and at the time when this first opened, it still had a good wait. So even if you had a 30 or 40-minute wait, your kids could run around and play for that time. And then you'd be buzzed when it was your turn to kind of get back in line. But now it's not used as frequently. It's still used, especially during busy season, but the line isn't quite as long as it had been. So that play area is not always open. But that was an amazing addition to Fantasyland. Great idea for little kids. I wish they would do more like this in a lot of these other really long line attractions because it was a great way to get kids to be able to run around and play. And then you could just be paged when it was your time and go back. So that was really, really cool. The Magic Kingdom, I guess one at the Magic Kingdom, one of the elephant sections goes clockwise and the other goes counterclockwise, which I never realized. And then there also is a original Dumbo the Flying Elephant car at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Art of American History, which is really cool. It was donated June 9th, my birthday, 2005, in celebration of the 50th anniversary of Disneyland. And one of our previous trivia questions on one of our episodes was in 1957, ex-President Harry S. Truman, who was a Democrat, visited Disneyland and declined to ride because the elephant represents the Republican Party, which is so funny to me that he refused to get on it. But you can ride this ride at Disneyland Paris, Shanghai Disneyland, Tokyo Disneyland, and Hong Kong Disneyland. So lots of different places that you can ride this throughout the world. But yeah, I know I remember vividly going for the first time on this with Makayla right after it changed and being amazed by the play area. But this is one that you went on a lot when she was little, right? Because using the play area was key.
yeah, it was. I thought that was a great idea. I really still to this day though struggle with the double Dumbos rides.
Yeah,
And I know they're trying to, I know they're trying, I know it was real popular. It was,
capacity.
Walt Disney came up with that idea way back in the 1950s. I get all that, but now if they're starting to close down that area and just maybe seasonally open it up because it's not getting the throughput it was,
Yeah.
it kind of shows you they probably could have gotten by with just one Dumbo ride and maybe give us something else, please.
Yeah,
And that whole and the play area is great. I remember Reagan and Michaela when she was little, and she'd tear around in there. And you're right. That's a great idea. It's air conditioned, but that whole area, the circus area, that's new.
it's eh.
I, I just can't for the amount of money they spent for that. I just not I don't get it. I don't even get it. It's like, what are you doing? It was kind of maybe a cheaper way out. Maybe they're spending a lot more money on Mine Train, Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, and all those other things that they did, and they just didn't have the funds to make that area better. I just think they could have done so much more. But of course, being Disney fans, we all think they could have done better in certain areas, right? I mean, there's definitely some places that are lacking a little bit. I think that's one of
Yeah.
them when it comes to the Magic Kingdom. But yeah, but as far as the Dumbo ride, it's great. It's a classic. I'd be shocked if that ever goes away. I highly doubt if it will.
Yeah, it does take up a huge piece of land in the new section. So it
Yeah.
was a little disappointing when they unveiled this new land that, yeah, the whole Toontown area got changed and what they replaced with was which we'll kind of talk about. But so the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train is the last big one in this area. This is a roller coaster. It does have a height requirement. I believe it's 40 inches. I'll double check that here. But when this was made, there was no obviously roller coaster in the Magic Kingdom. It was the first one to be, or not in the Magic Kingdom, in Fantasyland in the Magic Kingdom. It's 38 inches is the height requirement. But it was pretty neat. So they took out, unfortunately, Snow White's Scary Adventures. They closed that May 31st, 2012, and replaced it with a Princess Fairy Tale Hall, which is lame. Talk about taking a dark ride spot and replacing it with something so lame, where you could meet the princesses. So it's a Disney meet and greet area. And then they did a little theming to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs featuring Snow White's cottage in this roller coaster. You go through the mine. It is a steel roller coaster and it's at only the Magic Kingdom and Shanghai Disneyland. So it's only in two different parks. The roller coaster was manufactured by Vekoma and it's in Fantasyland in both of those two parks. The Magic Kingdom version opened May 28th, 2014, and then the Shanghai version opened up June 16th, 2016. So a couple years later, the movie Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs came out in 1937. It was initially brought to the parks in Disneyland with the Snow White Adventure, Snow White Scary Adventure ride, and then brought to Disney World as well. But the queue for this attraction again is very interactive. It has a couple of different things, this gem sorting game, and then there is, a couple of water things that you can play with. The dwarfs are, if all the dwarfs are on the ceiling, then Snow White appears in the middle of their animation. There's different musical spigots, which are, I guess, are the water things, the gem washing station. And the spigots, there, I guess, are 12 of them, which each represent a note on the chromatic scale. So it is another neat queue. It is a long wait. This one is always the most popular ride in Fantasyland. The height requirement is pretty low, so kids can usually go on this at the age of like 3 or 4, depending on their height. And the roller coaster, when I first went on it as a big coaster person, I was like, well, this is not that exciting. The actual queue, again, talking about the queue, was actually more entertaining to me than the ride, unfortunately. I thought it was cute. The little gem mining scene in the inside, you slow down and kind of go through this gem mining scene. Then at the end, it picks back up a little bit. You come out and you see Snow White dancing in the cottage, and the Wicked Witch is kind of peeking in the window at them. So they did a nice job with that part, but the actual coaster I thought was but it is made for little kids. So it's a great first roller coaster. If your kids have never been on a roller coaster, I think this one is way better than Barnstormer, which we're going to talk about. But this ride was really cool when it first came out and really popular and has stayed popular. But I think after riding it a few times, even Eiley is like Big Thunder Mountain is way better and she loves princesses. So, what do you think about this ride, Dad?
I think it's well done. My biggest problem with this ride when I went on it for the first time a number of years ago, it's just too short. You
Yeah,
just got to get
it's
into it and
short.
it's over.
Yeah, yeah.
And
That
that
maybe
might
that's
have
the issue.
yeah, and maybe because Big Thunder seems to go on for quite a while, right? There's a couple of different times where you get pulled up by the chain, you're going up the hills,
Yes.
the big hills. This one, I just thought it was too short. And I think most people I talked to, yeah, it's a little bit too short. Maybe it has to deal with real estate. Coasters need space, right? To make it longer, you got to have more real estate. And that might have been part of the problem because to me, it could have been give me another minute anyway, maybe 30 seconds, give me something.
Yeah.
But I thought the animation and all the everything, the way it was animated, all the new technology, I thought that was great. So I think some parts you went past a little bit too fast. I think at the end it kind of don't give you enough time really to grab
Yeah,
onto
you
everything that's
barely
going
see
on.
it.
Yeah, you barely see it. It's like slow down a little bit so you can check the stuff out. So those are my gripes with it. I think the queue is awesome. Yeah, it's a long wait. I haven't been on that in a couple of years now, but I think at Halloween parties a lot of times was when we would grab that because
Yeah.
the line was considerably smaller. But yeah, I just think it needed to be longer. I think that would have been a big win, and probably would have made it even more popular and longer wait lines. So, yeah, I like it. I think it's great, but needs to be longer.
Yeah, and this is one of the few rides that you can get as of right now an individual lightning lane for. So this is one that I suggest getting that lightning lane for it or going right when you get there in the morning. You're still gonna wait because oftentimes even when you first get in the line, if you are, in the front group of people, you still might wait 20 minutes, but it's worth it to go early in the morning, really late at night, or during the parade. Sometimes it drops a little bit, but getting that individual lightning lane is usually worth it if it's one that you cannot miss. If your kids are kind of between that height requirement and Big Thunder, or if Big Thunder is too intense for them. But it is definitely a lengthy wait, oftentimes more than an hour, sometimes up to 2 hour wait. And usually it's, hiked up a little bit as often a lot of wait times are, so it's not always as long as what it says, but it can get up there, that's for sure. And then our last attraction for Magic Kingdom is the Barnstormer. So this one I didn't initially have on my list, and then as we're talking, I'm like, oh yes, the Barnstormer. We did not talk about this. So this is considered, a junior, a starter roller coaster. It is one that you do have to have a height. It's a height requirement. It's 35 inches, so little kids can go on it. But this is one that is rough. If you have ridden on it in the last 10 years. I don't know if it's just the track is older or what, but it is bumpy and it is fast. So it actually seems faster to me than Snow White does. And maybe that's because Snow White's broken up a little bit, but it can fly pretty quick. The seats are very uncomfortable, hard, and bumpy. But this actually opened in 1996 and they began construction early in the year, opened later in the year in October, and was one of the three attractions that took its name from a former attraction. I guess there was something in the Opryland USA theme park in Nashville, Tennessee that was called the Barnstormer. The other two attractions that came from that now is gone. But at Disney California Adventure, they have Grizzly River Run still, and then Rock and Roller Coaster at Hollywood Studios. Both of those were attractions named after attractions at Opryland, which I did not know. The Barnstormer was kind of like the theme is like an airplane where Goofy is kind of learning how to fly, and then he kind of twists and turns throughout the track. But the attraction in the Fantasyland expansion initially was going to be rethemed to be called the Great Goofini, which was interesting. It's called the Great Goofini, but everybody knows it as like the Barnstormer. So it's the long name, which is crazy. I don't know why they decided to change it, is the Barnstormer featuring Goofy as the Great Goofini because they just had to make it obnoxiously long. But I guess some of the Toontown Fair area had been totally demolished, obviously, which we talked a little bit about in our Parks of the Past Magic Kingdom episode, like Mickey Mouse's house, Minnie Mouse's house. But Barnstormer is one of the few things where it stayed. The actual roller coaster is the same. They didn't really do anything or change it. But there are two trains that go through. So they load one, run it while they're loading the other one, and they each seat 16 people. So this can get a longer wait. It usually is not super long. On really busy days, it can get up to like 45 minutes. I would never wait that long for this. If you're not walking on this ride, it's not really worth it. But this is many kids' first roller coasters, and I think this freaks them out more than some of the other ones. It's really intense in speed, but it's kind of hokey and uncomfortable for adults, that's for sure. But I remember going on this many times as a kid, and I think Regan refused to go on this for a long time. Is that right, Dad?
Yeah, he discovered Big Thunder
Yeah.
Mountain. at a Halloween party we took him to, one of the Halloween Mickey's Not So Scaries, and he went on it like 4 or 5 times in a row with his friend. That was his first time, like, oh, the coasters are really fun. And, he was pretty young. I think he was probably 10 or 11, something like that. But yes, the Barnstormer, my biggest complaints, of course, I'm what, 6'1". So
Yeah.
just getting in it is uncomfortable. It's so
Uncomfortable. Yeah.
small. It's kind of like riding the raceway cars in Tomorrowland. It's like just
Yeah.
getting in, and you need a shoehorn just to get in the thing. And it's so fast. I mean, what is it? 45 seconds, maybe a minute,
Oh, it's so
maybe.
short. Yeah. I don't even know
Yeah,
that it's that long.
it's just, in and out, you up and down a few times, round and round, and you're done. Like, oh, that's it. But again, I think it's designed more for younger kids, that maybe it's like you said, the first coaster. Okay, I get it, because it seems like the seats are designed for kids too. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's been around a while, and it's probably not going anywhere soon. So
It does say it's 53 seconds long. So yeah, less
okay,
than a
there you
minute.
go. There you go. I just knew it
Very
was very quick.
Yes, not a big fan of this one. Okay, well, we are going to wrap up today's episode because this, Fantasyland, like we said, is so big. We have to kind of split it into two parts. So we will be back next week to talk through all the dining options, all the character meet and greets, some fun things about Fantasyland because there's so much. And then we'll rank our attractions from top to bottom. But there are so many in this one. We'll have to see what our differences are. But yeah, thanks so much for joining again, Dad, and we will see you next week.
Okay, see you later.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to give us a follow on Instagram at Soarin Around WDW Pod, where we share fun reels, throwback photos, and dive into our old versus new debates. If you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. And for our Spotify listeners, a follow and a 5-star review would mean the world. Thanks again for joining us. See you next time.